Thank you for joining me for another episode of A White Woman in Distress. This podcast is dedicated to raising awareness for missing children, teens, and adults who have disappeared under heartbreaking circumstances. My mission is to spread the word, keep their stories alive, and help bring these missing loved ones back home. It's time for us to come together as a community and recognize that not every missing person receives the same level of attention. Overlooked cases often involve marginalized groups, including Indigenous people, people of color, members of the LGBTQ+ community, runaway teens, and homeless individuals. These groups face unique challenges, from systematic racism and media bias to jurisdictional issues and social stigma. As a result, their disappearances are often under-investigated and lack the attention that they so desperately deserve, because anyone that's missing deserves the same amount of attention as every other case. We have to work together to bring these missing people home and to keep people from stealing our children, our family members, etc. You don't have to put yourself in harm's way just to help. Anonymous tips can be made, and they can make a world of difference. Our ultimate goal is to bring everyone home safely. Families deserve closure, and every missing person deserves to be found. Please be aware that content discussed in this episode may include violence, sexual assault, or murder, which some find distressing. Listener discretion is advised. Today, we're going into the haunting case of Thomas Eldon Bowman, a young boy who disappeared over 60 years ago. His story has lingered in the shadows of true crime, tied to one of the most disturbing figures in California's history. It was March 23rd, 1957, when 8-year-old Thomas Eldon Bowman, known as Tommy, vanished while on a family hike in Arroyo Seco Canyon near Altadena, California. That Saturday afternoon, Tommy and his family were out enjoying the foothills when he ran ahead of his cousins on the trail, calling out to them, "I'll beat you to the car." But when his family got to the car later, Tommy was gone, and no one could find him. Tommy, who had blonde hair and brown eyes, was last seen wearing a blue plaid shirt, blue jeans, brown shoes, and a Davy Crockett belt buckle. His family immediately launched a search, but despite their best efforts and those of local authorities, no trace of Tommy was ever found in the rugged terrain. The search for Tommy Bowman became one of the largest of its kind at the time, with helicopters flying overhead and volunteers combing the foothills on foot and horseback. Newspapers plastered Tommy's face on the front pages, and the community rallied to find him. For a week, the hope of finding the boy alive kept everyone going. But as the days passed, that hope began to fade. A week after Tommy disappeared, a strange letter arrived at the Bowman home. The letter claimed that Tommy was alive and being cared for by an unidentified man. Shortly after, another letter was sent to a local newspaper stating that Tommy was living in Oklahoma. However, neither of these letters led to any solid information, and both were ultimately deemed hoaxes. For years, Tommy's case remained unsolved, and his disappearance haunted his family and investigators alike. But then, in 1970, a name emerged that sent chills down the spines of those familiar with Tommy's story. And that name? Mack Ray Edwards. Edwards was a serial killer who, between 1953 and 1968, abducted, abused, and murdered children across California. Edwards, a heavy equipment operator, had a terrifying method of disposing of his victims. He buried their bodies beneath the highways of the roads that he helped construct. Edwards confessed to the murder of 6 children, but authorities believe that he may have been responsible for as many as 18 deaths, which is crazy. One of the first known victims was 8-year-old Stella Darlene Nolan, who was abducted in 1953 from her Newark home. Edwards confessed to throwing Stella off of a bridge in the Angeles National Forest. When he returned to find that she had actually survived, he then stabbed her to death, and then he buried her body under the Santa Ana Freeway. Other victims include Brenda Howell and Donald Baker, both 11-year-olds, who disappeared while on a bike ride in Azusa, California, in 1956. Their bodies were never found, but Edwards admitted to slitting their throats and leaving their remains somewhere in the mountains. In 1968, Edwards claimed 2 more lives: 13-year-old Gary Rocca and 16-year-old Roger Madison. He buried Roger's body underneath the Ventura Freeway, although it was never recovered. Finally, in 1970, Mack Ray Edwards walked into the LAPD station and he confessed to the murders. He asked for the death penalty, feeling the weight of his guilt was just too much to bear. He was sentenced to death, but in 1971, Edwards took his own life on death row, hanging himself with a television cord, which, if he was on death row, they shouldn't have TV. They shouldn't have any kind of perks whatsoever, because he decided he was going to take the life of children. And I believe that anyone that takes anybody's life shouldn't have any amenities. Honestly, we shouldn't even treat them like human beings at this point, because it's wild to me that he took all of these children's lives and they still, let him watch TV. Like, no, you killed children. Even if you killed adults, it's like, no, you don't deserve TV. You don't even deserve books. You deserve to sit in your cell and eat gruel and live out the rest of your life because you decided to take someone else's life. Although Edward's death closed the book on his crimes, it left many families, including Tommy Bowman's, without closure. The investigators believe that Tommy may have been one of his victims. In a letter discovered after Edward's death, he confessed to the murder of Tommy Bowman Boy, though he didn't include Tommy in his original confession. Authorities now suspect that Tommy's body might have been buried beneath a highway somewhere in Southern California. To understand why Tommy's case was unsolved for so long, we need to consider the limitations of law enforcement at the time. The 1950s and 60s were a totally different era when it came to investigating missing persons, which it's still different today, but on different levels. There were no Amber Alerts, there were no DNA databases, and there was just no sophisticated tracking system. Instead, police relied on physical evidence, witness testimony, and sometimes just plain luck. Tommy's case is a clear example of how the challenges of a time hindered the investigation. The terrain of Cerro Seco Canyon was difficult to search, and despite the widespread efforts, there were no advanced forensic tools available to help the authorities find him. Had this case happened today, Tommy's disappearance would likely have been handled very differently. With modern technologies like GPS tracking, cell phone data, and advanced forensic science, law enforcement might have been able to locate him sooner, or at least follow more definitive leads. Tommy's story, and others like it, remind me of my own experiences when I've joined search parties for missing people. Just recently, while searching for a missing person, I found myself in a terrifying situation. I walked through unfamiliar terrain, and we even ended up having a suspicious car follow the search party. And the fear was immediate. Was the person watching us? Were they watching me? Did they have ill intentions? Were they actually there for the search party? They just showed up super, super late. These thoughts raced through my mind, along with many others. It's moments like this that remind us how unpredictable people can be and why the work of searching for missing persons is so important. As frightening as that experience was, I know it's nothing compared to what the families of the missing persons go through every day. The constant not knowing, the fear of what might have happened to their loved ones, who could have been involved, where they are now, are they still alive? Tommy's disappearance still haunts the Bowman family today, just as it haunts many other families of missing children. Their search for answers has never ended, and their hope is that one day Tommy's remains will be found. In 2007, Tommy Bowman's case was reopened as part of a renewed search for the bodies of Mack Ray Edwards' victims. Investigators dug in areas where Edwards had worked, hoping to find evidence that could bring closure to these decades-old cases. Although the search yielding no new leads, the reopening of the case showed that the authorities had not forgotten about Tommy and that they remained committed to finding answers. It's a stark reminder that cold cases are never truly closed. New technology, fresh leads, and public interest can all breathe life into investigations that have long been dormant. And that's why podcasts like this exist, to keep these stories alive, to remind the public that there are still missing persons out there who need to be found. The case of Tommy Bowman is just one of thousands of cold cases in the United States alone. Every year, over 600,000 people go missing in the U.S. And while many are found, a significant number remain unaccounted for. But with the advent of technology, social media, and awareness, everyday people can now play a crucial role in helping solve these cases. If you have any information, no matter how small, regarding a missing persons or a cold case, I encourage you to come forward. Your tip might be the key to solving this case. By sharing these stories, raising awareness, and keeping these cases in the public eye, we can continue to fight for justice for the victims like Tommy Bowman. As we conclude today's episode, I want to thank you for listening and helping to raise awareness for these unsolved cases. Tommy Bowman's disappearance may be over 6 decades old, but his family still holds hope for answers. And that's what this podcast is all about. Keeping these stories alive, shining a light on the forgotten, and fighting for justice. If you want to learn more about Tommy's case or others like it, visit the Charley Project or your local FBI office. Your involvement can make a difference. Until next time, I'm Amber, your host, and this has been A White Woman in Distress. Awareness is the first step towards justice and providing families with closure. And remember, if you see something, say something, and do something. Thank you, and I will see you in the next episode. Until then, check me out on YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, and Facebook.